Hi, and welcome to this session on MTSS and equity, a virtual session of STEAMing It Up, using MTSS to support students in literacy and STEAM, our STEAM and MTSS conference for 2024. I hope you enjoy this session. It is a virtual one, but I will give you some opportunities to stop, pause, take some notes, think, or maybe have a conversation with a team if you look at this together with others from your school. My name is Lori Hensoldt. I'm the director of the Illinois MTSS Network. Really glad to see you here. We're glad you are coming together with other schools to learn more about ways that we can strengthen students' literacy and STEAM outcomes. Today, we're going to focus on the equity piece. MTSS is an evidence-based framework that can be leveraged to ensure equitable education opportunities for each and every student. So systems are always designed for the outcomes they experience. Rather than allowing MTSS to perpetuate any inequities, we want to use strategies to ensure high expectations, high quality instruction, and strength-based decision-making in an equity-based MTSS that supports positive student outcomes in academics, behavior, and social emotional learning. As we begin our journey, I just wanted to share a little bit about myself. My name is Lori Hensoldt. I have a bachelor's degree in early childhood and elementary education from the University of Illinois, a master's in instructional design, and an advanced certificate in learning design and leadership. I'm a doctoral candidate in educational policy, organization, and leadership at UIUC. I've been part of supporting Illinois schools and districts around RTI first, and then later MTSS for over 20 years. Currently, I serve as the director of the Illinois MTSS Network. We're proud to be part of the Division of Outreach, Engagement, and Regional Development at Northern Illinois University. And we offer professional learning, coaching, and technical assistance to schools and districts throughout the state. I wish I had an opportunity to have you share who all is in this session right now. I'm a Cubs fan, so you have that, and you can see I've got my Cubby blue on today. So, but I welcome you, whatever kind of fan or no sports fan at all. It is just great to have you here. Here are our learning objectives for this session. Please take a moment to read these and then consider which one might be most relevant to your own learning and the work you're doing in your own schools. We're going to touch on each of these as our districts and as we share about things we've done with our schools and districts. If you decide you'd like to learn more, we'll offer a follow-up session. Well, not a follow-up session, an alternative session on MTSS is being done by Kim Spiker. And you can see that also within the virtual sessions from the conference. It'll be a great one if you want a little bit more background knowledge on MTSS and go a little bit deeper into a few of the things. So, which of these 5 stands out to you? This illustration about equity comes from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it helps us visualize the difference between equality, or providing the same thing to everyone, in this case a bicycle, to all people without consideration of their individual needs and their differences. So think about this for a second. When you look at this visual, what comes up for you? What words, ideas, or questions does it bring up? You might want to pause and jot down some notes about what comes up for you as you think about this visual. If you're with a team, you can take this opportunity to talk and compare your thoughts. Bottom line is equity takes into account the needs of individuals and groups. In this example, the goal is for all these people to ride a bike, but the types of vehicles and the supports they provide need to be differentiated if that's what is going to happen for each individual. If equity looks like different bikes for different riders, what might equity sound like? The beliefs that we hold as educators can make a difference in the value we place on equity. And here are some examples of statements that you might hear when a school or district values equitable outcomes for all students and centers that value in the decisions that are made about access to educational opportunities and allocation of resources. You may have heard some of these around your own school. Your data can show you who in your school might not be experiencing equitable access to educational opportunities. And you might be surprised by who those students are sometimes. The Illinois State Board of Education says it this way: equity means having high expectations for every learner and providing supports and resources so each learner can meet those expectations. In other words, holding high expectations and providing supports as we do in a multi-tiered continuum of student supports, using data to identify who needs more, what they need, and the progress they are experiencing, and then allocating resources accordingly so that each and every learner meets those high expectations. Here's Illinois' definition of MTSS. You can see another thought bubble here asking you to think a little bit more about what concepts in this definition support equity. You might want to pause here again and jot down some notes, or if you're with colleagues, you can take this opportunity to talk and compare thoughts, and I'll pause just a second while you do that. Illinois' definition includes a multi-tiered system of supports, is a framework for continuous improvement that is systemic, prevention-focused, and data-informed, providing a coherent continuum of supports responsive to meet the needs of all learners. And I'm sure different things stuck out to different people. You might also know that researcher John Hattie identifies the use of a multi-tiered system of supports with fidelity to have an effect size on student learning outcomes of 1.29, where the hinge point or the minimum that he set is 0.4. So, and it's likely a framework that already exists in your school. So today we're sharing about how we can leverage this existing capacity as a powerful and really effective support for equitable outcomes for all students. Another way the National Equity Project describes equity is reducing the predictability of who succeeds and who fails in schools. And again, if we make connections to a multi-tiered system of supports, we can see the meaning of this definition a little bit more clearly. The ability to predict is a powerful fundamental concept, yet it also suggests a real pragmatic and practical first step to quickly identify the presence of inequity simply by looking at our data. When we look at high quality data across measures, we can identify predictable gaps in learning outcomes between groups of students who share common characteristics. And by data, we don't mean simply ethnicity or income level. What does our data say about our students with high levels of absenteeism? What can we predict about students identified as having experienced trauma? What can we predict? For students with poor social skills or poor self-regulation, what can we predict? For students whose parents are not engaged with school, what can we predict? If we collect the right kind of data and analyze them with an equity lens, we can predict who may struggle and then proactively intervene to prevent school failure. That's what we want to be able to do. Using an MTSS with fidelity is an ongoing continuous improvement process because we're always asking about what's not working and what we can do to make it work better. Using data to make decisions is a part of this model. And if we want to ensure equity, we want to be sure that we are making those data-based decisions using multiple measures, not just one measure at one point in time, beyond student learning data only. And we should be looking at academic, behavior, and SEL data together with our fidelity data. We're also looking at how learners perceive learning. Do they feel like they belong? We look at attendance data and the perception of teachers in the system. Do they feel they belong and are valued in the culture? Do they feel that they have the skills and the collaborative structures to meet student needs? Dr. Victoria Bernhardt is a great resource for understanding more by looking at the intersections of these data types, as you see in the illustration on the right. Equity-based MTSS is more than identifying who needs more, though. It's also looking at why they need more and then what might need to change. And this means intentional inclusion of all students. It means including student voice and family caregiver voice in the process. It means recognizing the strengths that even our struggling learners bring and considering diversity as adding richness to our school culture. not to be confused as an easy or just one-time process, and recognizing we all need support to do this, every person in the school. Although using an MTSS approach to meeting learners' needs has the potential to support equitable outcomes, unfortunately, that isn't always the case. Here are two examples of research studies that found that using MTSS-type practices resulted in the reinforcement of disparities for non-majority students, just the opposite of what we want to do and have MTSS do for our students. One conclusion across these research studies was that we need to look at more than the technical implementation if we want equitable outcomes from an MTSS framework. We're going to need to consider the context of the learning community and its students, adults, and community members. So we have to consider the context into which we implement. In other words, what is beneath the surface can be more important than what we can easily see sometimes. Yes, we want to work on the technical aspects of implementing well, but we also want to engage in ongoing critique of the why, ongoing conversations to make sure our way of working matches our why for doing so. And this means ongoing support for staff. It means providing the professional development that we all need. In addition to the technical implementation of the components of an MTSS, the Great Lakes Equity Center offers 4 core concepts of equity that we can consider. Each of these concepts has a citation on the slide, but you can certainly get more information on their website and in their free resources. The 4 core concepts are access, entrance into, involvement with, and full benefit, representation, having presence in decision-making and content, meaningful participation, agency, and empowered to contribute in effectual ways, high outcomes, solutions benefit all. This diagram shows a 4-step problem-solving cycle, or you might say a continuous improvement cycle, that can be used at all levels: district, school, grade, individual student. Your district might be using this model or something very similar. While several models for database problem solving do exist, the overall 4-step problem solving approach includes problem identification, or where are we now? Problem analysis, or how did we get to where we are? Plan development, or where do we want to be and how are we going to get to where we want to be? And evaluation, or is what we are doing making a difference? The problem-solving cycle is a strategy for analyzing and eliminating gaps between performance and goals. The purpose of the problem-solving cycle is to get all staff involved in analyzing how they are getting their current results before jumping to solutions, and to move from random acts of improvement to focused acts of improvement. And next, several slides are going to break this down just a little bit more. Researchers, practitioners, and MTSS innovators Amy McCart and Don Miller wrote a book on equity-based MTSS with examples and rubrics to guide the journey towards equity. And they describe an MTSS that centers equity as a complex schooling structure that brings together educator knowledge of content, science, and systems, resulting in positive benefit for all students. It is an organizing framework that uses specific data sources to inform decisions, coordinating diverse academic, behavioral, and social resources to meet the needs of each and every student in a dynamic and timely fashion. Note that it is a complex structure according to the authors, and it brings all the resources together in an organized way and uses appropriate data to make important decisions so that we can meet the needs of our students efficiently and effectively. And across all of these definitions, you're hearing a lot of duplication and replication. The end result of developing and using this framework is organizing and leveraging resources, expertise, experience, funding, practices, time, and educator knowledge towards learning growth for all students. If you look at your data, you'll likely find that your current MTSS framework works for some of your students, the ones seeing that learning growth right now. But how can we support all students to achieve positive outcomes and experience equitable opportunities? So using the principles of an MTSS framework, including continuous improvement at all levels, supports developing that system that works for all students. What would it take for each and every student to experience your learning growth in your school? What would need to change and what would stay the same? Over 20 years of research in the field of MTSS has revealed what the important components of a successful system are. You may find them with different names and different numbers of components, but there is consensus on what it takes to envision, implement, and sustain an MTSS with fidelity. So here are the 6 domains that we consider when we work with schools in Illinois. 3-tiered instruction and intervention, data and evaluation, leadership, capacity and infrastructure, communication and collaboration, and data-based problem solving. We've put them together in this keystone arch to show that all the components are necessary. When one is missing or neglected, the entire system is at risk of collapse. Often we find schools only consider the domain of 3-tiered instruction and intervention, but it takes more to have an effective MTSS system. Of these domains, which do you see as strengths for your school? And where might there be opportunities for growth? You might want to pause the recording here to consider where your school might be, jot down some notes for another conversation later. Or if you're with your team, you could have a conversation right now, and I'll pause for just a second to let you do that. Again, as a reminder, if you look up one of the other virtual sessions that Kim Spiker has done from the Illinois MTSS Network on what it takes to have a successful MTSS and what it looks like, that will give you some more information on these domains as you think about what you might want to bring towards your own continuous improvement process. So where do we start? I've provided some kind of big picture ideas of what needs to be included in an MTSS to support equity for all students. And one critical question we are often asked is, where do we start when we're trying to modify our existing system towards equity? And really, although I wish there's no one-size-fits-all answer, but most often we recommend that if our infrastructure is in place and we're not seeing the outcomes that we want to see for all students, the first place we should start is with the water. How many of you have ever had a goldfish? You brought it home from the store or the fair or the carnival or a fish store, put it in a fish bowl, and it starts out just fine. Swimming around, you feed it the official fish food, but after a few days, Mr. Goldfish starts swimming a little bit funny, or heaven forbid, he's floating on the top. And if you call and you ask the fish store about what to do, they are likely to ask you about the water in the fish bowl. That's what's affecting the fish, and that's what needs to be adjusted most likely. Our school systems and our students are very similar. In this analogy, strengthening tier 1 is the water. It's the place to begin building an equitable MTSS, just like addressing the water in the fishbowl. What in the curriculum, assessment, instruction, or environment needs to be adjusted to support growth for all of the students? Tier 1 or universal support should include a lot of things: high quality instruction, school supports, differentiation. And it can include different materials, different instructional strategies, different groupings and products, especially if you have a larger population of English language learners. So we can start by looking at our benchmark data, drilling down by student groups to see for whom tier 1 is working already. And how close are you to having the goal of 75 to 80% of your students experiencing success as a result of just tier 1 universal instruction? When you look at the other 20 to 25%, are certain student groups over-identified? All students are likely to benefit from improved tier 1 strategies. Now, of course, we want to look at whether or not the tier 1 curriculum and instruction that we have chosen is being implemented with fidelity. Here are some strategies you might consider adding to tier 1 instruction to make it stronger and to meet the needs of more students. And remember that your special education students are also mostly receiving tier 1. So when we strengthen it for tier 1, we strengthen it for all students, even those students who struggle. This might also be a nice place to pause and talk with your team a little bit about what you have in place for tier 1 and some of the things you may have seen in your data already that would give you an idea of which direction you might want to go in strengthening that tier 1 that instruction and intervention. And I'll pause here for just a second while you do that. Here are 5 features of MTSS to keep in mind as your school works to grow in equitable practices. Tier 1 sufficiency, matched to student needs for all student groups, general education that intentionally differentiates and supports students with IEPs, including special education, and considering universal supports as much as possible. A process for using data that supports equitable decision-making, attention to inequitable assessment and groups in need, looking at multiple measures of data and student group level data regularly, and then embracing a whole child approach that integrates academics, behavior, and SEL data when we're looking at things, integrates instead of separates into silos. Attention to inequitable attendance by student groups, strengths-based, culturally responsive and sustaining practices and policies. And then continuing the MTSS process beyond eligibility determination. We'll talk about a few of those as we move forward. Incorporating culturally relevant pedagogy is an important leverage point in an equitable MTSS. Over 2 decades ago, Gloria Ladson-Billings introduced the term culturally relevant pedagogy to describe a form of teaching that calls for engaging learners whose experiences and cultures are traditionally excluded from mainstream settings. Based on her research of effective teachers of African American students, Ladson-Billings proposed 3 goals on which these teachers' practices were grounded. First, teaching must yield academic success. Second, teaching must help students develop positive ethnic and cultural identities while simultaneously helping them achieve academically. And third, teaching must support students' ability to recognize, understand, and critique current and social inequalities. As we think about the effectiveness of core instruction, what is happening with the students with IEPs? These students are not at the tippy top of your triangle. They are throughout your continuum. And how does your core support them through UDL or differentiation or other additional supports for SEL or behavior? These are the students with the highest risk for long-term challenges in learning now and post-graduation. So having a system that layers supports for these students all throughout tiered supports can make a big difference for those students. And often, not always, but often it's our minority, non-dominant culture students who are in this group. How can we make MTSS work for them? How do we make the combination of core and tiered instruction plus supports happen? How do we use our special education staff and expertise? Here are some strategies to consider to make special education even more special. When students are made eligible for special education services, do you know what happens next? Do you know if your school's MTSS practices extend into this learning space as well? Evidence-based practices use, instruction and intervention matched to student need, progress monitoring, problem solving. Are students' IEP goals progress monitored? Does problem solving around the best teaching methods continue? Are supports still layered? Do special education staff sit on problem solving teams? and support the strengthening of Tier 1. You can get their input. This would be a good place again to pause the recording to consider your school's special education programming or have a conversation with your team. And I'll pause for just a moment to let you do that. Here's another resource to consider to promote equity that one of the districts that we have worked with at Illinois MTSS Network has implemented. So they had Elevating Student Voice. This is from perts.net. You can see the link there and some ways to get them more involved. And then another thing that they did was addressing grading practices as part of their equity journey. They used this book by Joe Feldman, published by Corwin, to make sure that grading was accurate, resistant to bias, and motivating for student learning. So this is the original edition of the book. I think there's a second edition that you could look into as well. But those two things, elevating student voice and addressing grading practices, are great strategies. Another equitable Tier 1 MTSS practice is analyzing multiple measures of data. You've heard me say that many times. School and grade level teams look at student learning data a lot of times, which is great. Some may also review and discuss attendance or behavior data. But in keeping with the idea of supporting the needs of the whole child, it's important to review a variety of data in order to get the whole picture of what's happening and make an appropriate plan. When we work with schools, we encourage them to think about what data they have access to under 4 categories. We ask them to think about demographics, perception, student learning, and school process data. Those are the 4 categories from the work of Victoria Bernhardt. And the images here are examples of data displays for those 4 Bernhardt categories, along with a reminder to look at behavior and attendance data because they are especially relevant and insightful. Once teams dig into several kinds of data and look for themes, they can begin to see needs that can be addressed. Other schools we worked with have also uncovered concerns related to changing demographics in their building because things are different, and what shifts might need to be made to support all students equitably. And we advocate for looking at multiple measures of data, but be careful not to become overwhelmed by too much data that can just really frustrate and paralyze your team. Start simple and expand as staff capacity improves and as your needs arise. So these are things that building leadership teams, grade level teams, middle school, high school department teams could benefit from looking at and problem solving using these different measures of data alongside each other to get a better picture of how students are doing. So engaging in continuous improvement through data analysis is really important. Our aim is to do that continuous improvement through data analysis using those various measures. And we encourage you to create a data culture where data collection and database problem solving take place at all levels and are an accepted practice, where staff have the time, the expertise, and the confidence to engage in data analysis. In some schools, Tier 1 database problem solving occurs during a weekly PLC. Tier 2 and Tier 3 occurs during weekly grade level team meetings. There's lots of different structures that you can use to make sure. These kinds of data meetings can include reflecting on the implementation and the fidelity assessments alongside to ensure that practices and processes are implemented effectively. It's really helpful to have a protocol that involves reviewing action plans and analyzing your data, making necessary adjustments to facilitate the efficient work of a team so that they're not floundering, but they have a protocol to walk through. An MTSS problem-solving team protocol guides your teams through those conversations at every level that they're doing that database problem solving. And that uses those 4 steps of defining the problem, analyzing, implementing a plan, and evaluating the plan. When your teams look at screening data to examine grade level growth, it's also really essential to review the same data by groups of students to make sure that all students are growing. There's no evidence to suggest that there's a higher incidence of intrinsic learning problems in any particular race or ethnic group. There is, however, evidence of historical and ongoing disparate achievement and growth within certain student populations on a national level. So disaggregating data to examine and respond to the lack of growth of special populations within a school or district promotes equity. That's why it's so important to use universal screening tools that include demographic information or data tools to enable this type of analysis. When specific student groups are making less than average growth, an equitable MTSS responds to those needs by making changes to instruction, curriculum, and the learning environment to create those equitable educational opportunities. Here's some data from the IRC 2019. These data are showing chronic absenteeism as a significant factor in developing an equitable MTSS, because we see some of our more vulnerable, non-dominant culture students are those who often also struggle with absenteeism from school. And of course, students can't benefit from even the best instruction and intervention if they don't receive it due to that ongoing pattern of absences. So developing a system of support, an MTSS tiered approach to student attendance, can really impact the success of your tier 1. And it can support equity by supporting students in these subgroups to be present for that high quality instruction and intervention that you provide. It can eliminate one of the reasons why there's an ongoing achievement gap for these students. They're not in school, and it can also support equitable outcomes. This graphic provides a continuum that ranges from school attendance to a wide variety of school attendance problems. As you can see, these different attendance challenges need a continuum of supports to address them from very early signs to complete dropout. So an equitable MTSS will create a continuum of supports, beginning with tier 1 to support each of these. As we move into tiers 2 and 3, you would be addressing the full spectrum of school attendance problems. So what do your data show you about what students or student groups might have their school success impacted by the lack of consistent attendance? I'll pause here so you can take some notes or have a conversation with your team if you're present with your team. And I encourage you to take a note of the citation on the bottom of the slide and look more at some of the great work that those researchers have done. Strategy you might consider to promote equity is the use of parent liaisons to engage with that broader school community. A lot of them will find that they can connect better. They definitely need some training on how to do that, but they can connect better with other parents, especially of the more vulnerable populations. They could sponsor things like parent patrols. They can participate in Skyward training. They can do book clubs. They can do some walkthroughs with other parents to give them a feel for the school. They can help with some of the Skyward messaging or social media messaging. They can do coffees with the principals. They can do phone calls with administrators that are sponsored. There's lots of interesting things that can be done. And you may want to have a parent advisory committee whose objective is to help establish that collaborative voice between parents and teachers and students in a community of learners. And consider that the purpose of these parent liaisons is to promote that welcoming climate for parents to have sort of a point person, a contact person within the building to facilitate and build relationships between school and home. Here is the book that I mentioned earlier. I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of resources for you. Leading Equity-Based MTSS for All Students by Amy McCart and Dawn Miller. If you can get your hands on that, it's it's very easy to read and laid out very, very well, and really integrates equity into a multi-tiered system of supports. Another great resource is the Great Lakes Equity Center. There are a lot of things there that you can take a look at in terms of what does it mean to define equity within your school? What are some barriers one might encounter in making an equitable MTSS and opening up access to educational opportunities for all students. Just as we close, here are some things that I mentioned during this session: using multiple measures of data, looking beneath the surface of implementation, exploring those 4 core components of equity from Great Lakes Equity Center, strengthening your Tier 1, integrating culturally responsive practices, strengthening special education, considering student voice, addressing grading practices, using MTSS to prove attendance, and then we talked about parent liaisons as well. As you consider these, what might be a next step for you in your school? I'm going to let you pause the recording for just a second and jot down a couple of names you might want to have a conversation with, a couple of notes or thoughts, or if you're with your team, you can have a conversation about whether you would engage one of these steps or a different step. And I'll pause right now so you can do that. And finally, thank you so much for attending this session on MTSS and equity, and for being part of the Steaming It Up conference for 2024. Please remember to complete your survey. We gathered in the room on the day of to get credit for all those PDHs that you participated in during the day in person. So if you didn't get a chance to do that, please add that. And if you want to, please be sure that you contact someone through one of these 2 email addresses, and we will try to get back to you just as quickly as we can. If you want to email me, my email is lhensold, LHENSOLD, @niu.edu. I hope you have a great rest of your conference and rest of your summer, and that you really are able to return to the classroom in the fall, energized and ready to make outcomes improve for each and every student. Thank you.